Today's episode is brought to you by CASSA, the Canadian Association of School System Administrators. If you've been listening to Education Matters, you know that one of my central themes is exploring Canadian identity through education and connecting the dots between leadership, policy, and meaningful change. And so this is exactly what CASSA does. They bring together superintendents and system leaders from coast to coast to coast across Canada to tackle the biggest challenges in public education, with a sharp focus on equity, student success, and collaboration. Learn more at CASSA, that's CASSA-ACGCS.ca.
And the good life means that everyone is looked after. And in our world where we are constantly trying to get ahead and the dollar is the measurement, we have a danger of undermining that democracy by chasing something other than a good life, which is all about fairness, equity, and kindness, and looking after each other and sharing the wealth that we have, sharing the resources that we have. I really believe that that's what we're trying to do in education.
Welcome to Education Matters. In today's episode, we're doing something a little different again, and something I've wanted to do for quite a while now. At last year's annual Canadian Association of School System Administrators Conference, we asked guests who are education leaders from across Canada one question: what makes Canadian education special? It's a simple prompt that asked folks to reflect on what we do really well in education. As Canadians, this is not something we're particularly inclined to do. We'd rather look at what needs to be done and get on with it. However, as I've mentioned many times here before, I've had the true privilege of working all across the country and have met incredible educators doing incredible work, and I wanted to share their stories. And what you'll find in this episode is a shared ethos, one that's worth celebrating, questioning, and protecting. We've brought those voices together into a single episode, organized around several themes that have emerged from the responses. They include diversity and multiculturalism, equity, public education and access, Indigenous education and reconciliation, citizenship, and high-performing public schools. To help us make sense of these insights, I invited back Reginald Klassen, Executive Director of CASSA. If you've listened to our earlier episode, you'll know Reg brings a deep systems-level perspective shaped by decades in the field. As the leader of CASSA, one of the only national networks in a decentralized education system, Reg is uniquely positioned to reflect on what unites us across provinces and what makes Canadian education identity worth paying attention to. This episode will also serve as a lead-in to CASSA's upcoming national conference, taking place on July 2nd to 4th at the Sheraton Cavalier in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. It's an annual gathering that brings together superintendents and school system leaders from across the country, and it's exactly the kind of space where these questions about Canada's education identity are debated, shared, and strengthened. And I am pleased to say that we'll be supporting again with the podcast and with the podcast lounge. So whether you're tuning in from the classroom or a board office or somewhere in between, this episode offers a cross-country snapshot of what makes our system unique through the voices of those leading it. Without further ado, let's get started. Hello, Reg. Welcome back to the podcast. Been looking forward to this one for a while.
Thanks, Jason. It's good to be here. I am eager to talk with you again about education and kind of reflect on some of the comments we captured at our last conference. And speaking of conferences, I just want to let people know that July 2nd to 4th, 2026 in Saskatoon is our next conference, and I expect that our registration will be online within the next 2 to 3 weeks. And we have some exciting keynote speakers planned for that. And again, some really strong breakout sessions. So I'm hoping everybody is eager to attend because it fills up fast.
Well, that's great, Reg. And this podcast will give everyone a real great sense of what you do at CASSA and the kind of guests that are there and how we're thinking about public education across Canada. So with that, Reg, we will jump into our first set of comments from guests from last year's conference and hear what they've had to say about diversity.
I think what's unique about Canadian education is just the size. It's such a large country with such diverse communities. And so that's one of the unique things about the Canadian education system, is that in general, all programs and supports need to kind of reflect that diversity across the country.
We're much more culturally responsive and aware, particularly when it comes in Indigenous education, but not just Indigenous. We have, obviously a large immigrant population. Doesn't matter where you go now, whether it's the rural parts of the country or in urban centers, there's so many languages being spoken that I think we've prioritized that as something that we want to care for.
I think what has been unique in my jurisdictional scans and understanding about education across Canada would be the focus obviously on multiculturalism, which fosters, again, a lot of equal opportunities, regardless of background, and that we are creating these inclusive environments in our schools. And additionally, I strongly feel that Canadian education takes a very student-centered approach. And so we are focusing largely on critical thinking and creativity and lifelong learning, which really creates global leaders in education.
The education system in Canada, like our population in Canada and our culture, is that we're inclusive. And I think we try in our Canadian school systems to let all of the voices be heard and solve problems in more complex ways.
Canada just has so much complexity to it. It's diverse. There's so many languages. There's so many new Canadians here, so much multiculturalism. That's what makes Canadian education so great.
So what I think is unique and special is we can still put in our own sets of values and our ways of doing things to be able to deliver a service that is special, unique, and meets the needs of many diverse students and based on our realities, because Canada is such a vast country.
So, Reg, we just heard from those folks talk about diversity and multiculturalism. In your view and in your role at CASSA, what is it about Canada's approach to diversity that you really think genuinely shapes how people live and learn together across the country?
Well, I think for decades, if not centuries, Canada has protected diversity. We haven't always done a good job of it, particularly with the diversity of our Indigenous, but certainly from the very beginning, when we think about French and English, and then all of the immigrants that came, we want to protect that diversity. And I think that adds to our classrooms. Diversity in our classrooms makes a huge difference, and we honor and respect, to the best of our ability, the diversity that students bring into that classroom. And that really helps students see beyond themselves and their own world. And I think that's really important. And I see many, many educators looking to honor that, protect that among their students, and highlight that as a way to learn from each other.
Wonderful, wonderful. Couldn't agree more. And Reg, now in a related area to diversity and multiculturalism, a number of folks that were part of our podcast lounge talked specifically about the importance of equity across Canada. Let's hear from our next set of speakers.
There are so many things that are unique and special about Canadian education. The one that's most recognized for internationally is the equity that our education provides. No matter who you are, your background, your social economic status, your experience, you have an equal chance of succeeding and having a great education.
So I think the first thing is that we prioritize equity over competition. So you've seen a big shift over the years in terms of just reducing the impact of ranking and grading and all those things. Not that those things don't still have value, but the priority is like, let's make sure everyone learns rather than just identifying who's the best.
Yeah, I think what's unique about Canada's education system is that it's all-encompassing in terms of culture, and those are so rich. It really becomes a system about equity over competitiveness, those sort of things. As we look across the country, there's a lot of sharing that happens. I think that's very unique. Sharing from provincial organization to provincial organization, from school division to your neighboring school division. Not reinventing the wheel, but actually finessing, taking a wheel and then, adding your spokes that make it work. And I think that sharing really perpetuates the system.
I think that education in Canada is centered on the student and the potential for a student to do whatever they're capable, whatever potential that they have. We invest a lot of resources in understanding how students learn. Conversations have evolved over years about what, literacy, numeracy goals we have in terms of being competitive on an international scale, but certainly we're looking at the well-being of the student.
I would say what makes our Canadian education system special is the degree to which we look to see the individual student and to meet the needs of the individual student. Personalizing, it's not a big box store service. It's really who is the individual student, who are we trying to reach, and the personalization that we bring to the experience.
So, Reg, having listened to that, why do you think Canada has been able to support equity in education more effectively probably than a lot of other countries?
I think because we simply believe that equity, as difficult as it may be to achieve, is ultimately important. And the reason why it's ultimately important is because equity creates opportunity for students, not just those who already come to school with opportunity, but for those that come from, let's say, impoverished backgrounds, come from difficult situations. And in the classroom, we try to create a level of equity so that everybody can learn and achieve the same outcomes. And that's really important. That makes our society stronger. We don't talk about that with our students, but we know as educators that makes our society, our democracy, stronger when we create equitable situations, and take our society in a way forward that gives people opportunity. Really, what equity is about is eliminating obstacles. And in the education world, it's about eliminating obstacles to learning. And that's not an easy task, but something that we take pride in as Canadians.
Yeah, and I think connected to that, Reg, is what our next set of speakers spoke about, which was really how we have across the country, although so many different jurisdictions, overall we have a robust public and publicly funded education system that provides access to all students. So let's hear from them and what they had to say about that.
The Canadian education system is great because it's available for all. I feel I'm proud to be part of the Canadian education system.
Public education literally is the great leveling field, I think, for all citizens of Canada, and especially for our young people. Canada, even through its colonial history, is a place where people have come from parts around the world to make improvements in their lives, to give their kids a better opportunity. And public education really is the foundation of that. And I honestly believe that, we have set up a system where through hard work, perseverance, and hopefully opportunity, students can move through our system and find a way to change their life chances and seek out the opportunities that they're looking for. The other interesting part, of course, is that we have provincial and territorial jurisdiction over education in this country. And so even though the nuances of it are quite different, I think that philosophically and foundationally, it is pretty consistent across all points of Canada. We just have a commitment to public good. We want to ensure that public education remains public, that it's good for society to have a strong public education. And so while, yes, there are private education and private schools in Canada, I don't think it has the same trajectory and growth as it would perhaps in the US. And so still maintaining strong public education across country and every province.
One of the things that I think is incredibly important in the Canadian context is that we have a deep belief in public education. So as I reflect on this last month and attending the convocations in many of our senior year schools, our students are walking across the stage to get a diploma that much of the world covets. And they don't have access to it.
public education in Canada has a lot of diversity from province to province. And so I would reference the Alberta story, which is the fundamental reason why I serve. I can certainly believe in choice in education, public education. That's an important thing. And the Alberta story is that there's a variety of options available to students to attend public, Catholic, and in many cases, Francophone schools can become a choice.
From my perspective, what I see is we have a situation where teachers still have a connectivity to the students. And especially where I'm from, I walk through classrooms where I see the conversations occurring between teachers and students that I wouldn't see if I walked into larger schools. So our smallness gives us a connection that makes us special.
So, Reg, with that, let me ask you a question. What makes Canada's commitment to public education feel distinctive and worth protecting?
I think that we believe that it is the way to move forward as a country. So the robust funding, although nobody would say that we have enough, there's always a limit to the financial funding that comes to education. But we put a lot of funds into the resources, into salaries, into building good schools in order to create environments where students can learn. And that door of that school is open to every single student, regardless of where they might come from, whether they be third, fourth generation in the country, first generation, or they've been here for thousands of years. That's open to everyone. And when they enter that school, there is an equity that we try to create. And that allows us to educate robustly for our children. And I think that makes all the important difference.
Yeah, I think that's really is a great point, Reg. And a lot of the guests you'll hear in the next clip connected that to citizenship. So let's take a listen and ask you a question about education and citizenship.
Well, I've had the privilege of being a learner in the public education system in Manitoba, both rural and urban contexts. And I'd say that for me, the thing that makes Canadian education and specifically public education so rich is our commitment to community, our commitment to thinking about citizenship. And we've really, I believe, developed curriculums and developed important experiences for students where they're learning in context of what it means to live a good life and to live in a good way and to be a contributing member of the community in which you live. And to me, that's the ultimate outcome of education.
Canadian educators encourage critical thinking. I saw a quote today that said, disagreement isn't dysfunction, it's democracy. And I think that's incredibly powerful for educators to remember.
I think one of the things that I really love about the Canadian education system is that we are constantly trying to create critical thinkers. And we're not a system that typically values rote learning. Our educators are always trying to promote that critical thinking and inquiry. And I think the further we get into the 21st century, the more that's starting to happen in our classrooms. And that's something that we should be really proud of.
But I would say we would probably define our purpose being more around creating good citizens. That's the goal. And as part of being a good citizen, you probably should have some skills to be able to contribute to society through your occupation, through your career.
How we talk about and how we conceive and consider public education in Canada, the beauty of it, and therefore the inherent hope and joy, is that it is meant to allow democracy to flourish. So when I hear people say at convocations or at different times of the school journey, well, we're preparing our students to be citizens, like I push back against that because actually our students are already citizens. When I think about public access to education, it's allowing our students to grow their capacity to not only participate fully in democratic spaces, but to influence those democratic spaces. I think there is no time that is more important to me than it is now. How how we in Canada intentionally think about public education as a place to heal, as a place for reconciliation, as a place to identify those competencies that will allow our students to be able to live Minopi-Metisawin, which means the good life, is so important. And I think that sets us apart. And I think about the folks who are here at this conference who believe deeply at the core that public education is about the support of, the amplifying, and the illumination of democracy in our country.
Okay, Reg, so we heard from a number of folks talking about citizenship there. But in particular, I thought Sandra, the superintendent of River East Transcona, did a really amazing job at describing the connection between public education, democracy, and living the good life. So how do you think Canada's education system shapes the kind of citizens that we hope young people will become?
Well, first, let me say that knowing Sandra and having talked with her about these things, I would agree with her wholeheartedly. And the notion of democracy and a good life for me is one of my things that I love to articulate. We sometimes, and I've said this before, we sometimes get caught up in marks. We sometimes get caught up in LA and mathematics and other subject. And I know that people say that all people in Canada, including children, are citizens, although those young citizens aren't fully fledged citizens in terms of the rights and some privileges or the rights that they have. But we are trying through education to create young people and help them mature into the fully fledged citizen so that they can take a place in a democratic society and enter into that space and make a contribution. And so it goes beyond just becoming an adult and existing. It moves towards, with the understanding and knowledge that we give children in education, they can make a contribution towards the good life. And the notion of good life is somewhat recent in terms of it's been given to us graciously by our Indigenous community. And the good life means that everyone is looked after. And in our world where we are constantly trying to get ahead and the dollar is the measurement, we have a danger of undermining that democracy. And I think in countries around us, you can see that a little bit. There is that danger. And to undermine that democracy by chasing something other than a good life, which is all about fairness and equity and kindness and looking after each other and sharing the wealth that we have, sharing the resources that we have. I really believe that that's what we're trying to do in education. And so when we talk about democracy, it goes way beyond just having the right to vote, in my opinion.
Wonderfully put. And now, as you alluded to, Reg, a number of our guests also talked about Indigenous education and reconciliation. So let's hear what they had to say.
I think what's unique about the Canadian system is the fact that we really promote languages, so that we're a bilingual country, so that you can go in several provinces, in several school boards and get French and English. But more importantly, there's been an uptick in Indigenous languages. So, for example, when I went to high school, I was only able to take English and French. But now my daughter, who's 5 years old, when she gets to high school, she'll be able to take our language, which is Mohawk. So I think that's an amazing thing to occur, and that's only happening in Canada.
When I think about that question, I think about truth and reconciliation, and I think about our work in creating culturally responsive curriculum in our schools. And I think those calls to action are what are really unique, in that I've worked in a lot of places where part of our growth plans had to include the calls to action and how we were personally working on those calls to action. And given that lens in our work with children, I think is a really unique perspective.
Well, I think there's some interesting things about education in Canada, about how we're preparing kids to make a debut into democratic society. And in Manitoba, we're talking lots about what that means through an Indigenous perspective, and particularly thinking about the Indigenous perspective of, Pimatswin, helping kids to learn how to live the good life. And when we think about all that we're doing in terms of equipping our students with skills, knowledge, and attitudes to be successful, we want all of our kids, no matter what that pathway is for them after K to 12, to be ready to live the good life and to make that debut into democratic society.
So, Reg, as you had just alluded to, a number of participants at CASSA really wanted to talk about reconciliation. So can I ask you, what does meaningful progress towards reconciliation in education look like to you in Canada today?
I guess I would begin by saying listening. It's a tragedy that we're 100 years behind. If we had done that 100 years ago, and the learning that we are beginning to gain, the knowledge that we're beginning to gain from our Indigenous communities in terms of seeing this world differently as a place to honor and protect as opposed to pillage, in a sense. I think that's a beginning. But to have conversation, to learn from that conversation, and then to take action. And I'm not always sure what the action would be, because the conversation will drive that, and everybody has that conversation. But when we do that, when we listen, share, and then take action to try to move forward in a better way than we have, and there's a ton of ways in which we can do that. I think we have the possibility of moving towards reconciliation and acting on reconciliation. I'm not sure that we'll get to a full reconciliation. I certainly don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime, but we have begun the movement. We're way behind. We need to be energized by it, but I think seek to understand and to recognize the harms of the past and commit to not doing them in any way again to any person.
Yeah, Reg, and what I will say on that front is the progress certainly doesn't feel it's where it should be, but it is significantly better than when I went to school, a generation ago, that we weren't even taught about our Indigenous history as part of the country, a truly foundational piece of our history. And so it was hidden. It was literally hidden from us for decades, and that's no longer the case. So thank you, and thanks to all the guests for sharing their perspectives on that. So our last and final set of clips, Reg, are maybe appropriately on how Canada does have high-performing public schools. So let's take a listen.
Well, we're one of the higher performing jurisdictions in the world, number one, in terms of international testing, and also as identified by the OECD, so the Organization for Economic and Community Development. Canada offers a fantastic public education system.
I think what makes Canadian education exceptional is it activates the power of teachers as professionals. We trust teachers to bring out the very best of students, and through their creativity, their innovation, and their dedication, that's what they do.
Education in Canada is a real hidden gem. When you look at PISA scores, Canada is always near the top, but we do so much more. We're an innovative country, and the fact that we don't have a national pan-Canadian direction really helps us. Every province can do what they feel is important.
Canada's public education system isn't just about the system. It's a deep-seated way that we reflect our values as Canadians. And we use education to prepare students to be an informed electorate so that they can both meet their potentials personally and collectively. And that's that public piece in public education that I think we're known for all over the world.
Education in Canada is very important, and we want to make sure in the public K-12 education system that we do the best for our students. And I think that's a common theme throughout, that every province wants to do the best by their students, through their teachers and everyone working in their education system.
So, Reg, with that, can I ask you a question about Canada's public schools and our ability to perform well without losing our kind of focus on the human? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess I would start by talking about the professionals we have in the system, particularly in the classroom, dedicated people that really believe in education. Sometimes I think that our universities are challenged to keep up to the modern world and what they're preparing our educators to deal with in the classroom. If we think about AI, or we think about the way that students have access to knowledge, but we are a high-performing education system. And the rest of the world looks at what we're offering and says, we'd like some of that. And I think that we need to continue the commitment. And that takes the finances, which we talked about. That takes the highly trained professionals. That takes the open access for all students. It can't be, limited. It has to be open to all students. And that creates a system that is robust, that creates a system that's healthy. And I know there's lots of challenges and lots of situations where we think we don't have enough resources, or we don't have enough teachers, or students have too many challenges. But we work really hard to walk beside every student along the road of learning where they are. And that's a gift that we give our kids. That's a gift that we have to our country. And I don't think that we should lose that gift. We need to continue to walk alongside our students to the best of our ability. And I think that means that we have a robust education system that others look across our borders at and say, would like a piece of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's certainly true. And I think one of the other pieces to add to that, Reg, is that no one's really happy with this. Like, we're proud of the system, but we want to continue to improve it. So we're happy with the progress we made, but I don't think anybody is resting on their laurels. Everyone wants to continue, especially in light of AI and all the societal changes that are happening, to continue to bolster our public education system and our democracy here in Canada. So with that, Reg, I want to thank you for doing this podcast. This kind of pan-Canadian conversation is really the reason I started the podcast in the first place. You know, as executive director, you have a very similar privilege now in your role that I've had over the years of seeing our public education system from coast to coast to coast. So this was an honor and a pleasure to do this episode with you.
Thank you. It's an honor to speak to you about education. It's always enlightening. I'm thrilled by the comments that were made at our last conference that we've seen here today, and the rigor, the passion, the commitment that people demonstrate in the way that they speak about education. When you meet educators from across the country, it's amazing the level of passion that they have for the work that they do, for the children that they serve, for the communities that they serve. It's an exciting enterprise to be a part of.
Absolutely. And I want to remind folks that we will be at next year's summit with the podcast lounge and interview booth, and we'd love to hear from you. So we hope to see you there.
Remember, everyone, July 2nd to 4th in Saskatoon, 2026. That will be our next CASSA conference. Look forward to seeing you there.
This podcast is recorded on the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Buccheri. Until next time.